Ukrainian officials say at least 7 people were killed in a dual Russian missile attack in the eastern city of Pokrovsk on Monday evening. 5 of the victims were civilians. The second missile hit after about 40 minutes after the first one, killing and wounding rescuers. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the building, which was hit, was an ordinary residential building. Rescue efforts are continuing, and the city lies about 70 kilometers northwest of Donetsk City, which is occupied by Russian forces. Before the war, it had a population of around 60,000 people.
Дорогі українці, українки.
A rescue operation is underway in Pokrovsk, Donetsk region. After Russian missile strikes. Iskander missiles against ordinary residential buildings. All our services are working on the spot. Unfortunately, there are victims. There are wounded, there are dead. My condolences to the families and friends. The second missile strike, unfortunately, resulted in the death of a member of the State Emergency Service.
Співробітників ДСНС.
Let's get more on this from our chief correspondent, John Cookson, who joins us live from London. John, great to see you. What more can you tell us about this latest attack by Russia?
Hi, ladies. Good to be on Newsday. Well, this attack happened, as you said, last night, and at this hour, they're still looking for survivors in the rubble from that bombed-out apartment building. The Ukrainians say a number of private homes were hit, along with a catering establishment, it's been described as, and also the Druzhba Hotel, which has been used many times in the past by aid workers. It's in a very dangerous zone. It's very close to the front line, and the official version from city officials is to tell people not to stay in Pokrovsk, but if it's your home, then you want to stay, and people will be passing through, staying at a hotel, and all that kind of thing. It's a slightly new tactic from the Russians to fire one missile and then fire another one 40 minutes later, knowing darn well that there'll be rescuers in the area covering the first attack. Now, if the Russians have deliberately targeted civilian structures, then that would amount to a war crime, one of thousands that have been logged so far in this war. The Russians are saying, though, today that what they were doing was trying to hit a Ukrainian command post. Now, there's no way of telling whether that's the truth or the real story here. We just have to make our own minds up and listen to what both sides are saying. The Ukrainians are denying that there was any command post in the area. But the Russians say often in these cases when they hit civilian targets that they were really striking at weapons stores or, as in this case, a command post. It comes a day after, of course, the Russians hit the eastern city of Kharkiv and attacked what was described by the Ukrainians as a blood transfusion center. Again, disputed facts of the Russians claiming that it was being used for military purposes. So more of the same. We've seen this very often in the last few weeks and months, this constant low-level bombardment, and Ukrainians are doing the same, hitting targets in Russia just over the border. And this seems to be the way things are going forward for the time being.
And is the Ukrainian government saying any more about that attempt to assassinate President Zelensky recently?
Only that a woman who's at the center of this allegation is being questioned by Ukrainian secret services at this hour. If found guilty, she faces 12 years in prison. The background to all of this was that she worked at a military base in the past as a saleswoman and apparently made contacts with the Ukrainian military during that time. And Zelensky was in a town called Mykolaiv recently, and it's there that they alleged that the woman passed information to her Russian handlers so that the Russians could carry out an airstrike on wherever Zelensky was in Mykolaiv. So we wait to hear more about that. Of course, Zelensky, number one target for assassination by the Russians. You remember that a year last February, when the war started, some 400 Russian mercenaries were in Kiev at the start of the war with the mission to assassinate Zelensky. But so far, his security has been absolutely fantastic, and no assassination attempt has been successful so far. And it seems like this is another one that's been thwarted.
Indeed. Well, John, a number of nations gathered in Saudi Arabia last weekend to discuss a peace plan for Ukraine. Is that gaining any traction?
According to the countries that took part, and they include Russia, sorry, not Russia, but the US and China, yes, the peace proposal put forward by Zelensky is gaining traction amongst world leaders. The Zelensky proposal for peace in Ukraine is for the withdrawal of all Russian forces from Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, reparations and prosecutions for war crimes. I mean, it's a long shopping list that Zelensky has put forward for nations to support. And if he can get China's support, that will be a fantastic move for him and help Ukraine win some sort of peace treaty. However, as I said, Russia was not at the conference, and many observers are saying, well, if the Russians aren't there, it's not really worth talking about. And there's some argument to say that's true. But the fact that the peace treaty got another airing on the world stage, and according to the people who took part, the nations that took part, it is getting some traction around the world, then of course it was worth talking about. But this all comes, of course, as the Ukraine counteroffensive pretty much stalls in the south, and there's huge pressure on the regime in Kiev to come to some kind of truce at some point.
Yeah, and we'll continue to keep our eyes on these stories. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, John Cookson.